like Corey promised, at the end of tonight, we will all hopefully have everything we need to get out there and help some of these amphibians cross the road. But first, let me just share my screen here. Can you all see that beautiful spotted salamander? Great. We'll start out by talking about the amphibians, these non-human neighbors of ours that inspire this work. And amphibians are our frogs, our toads, and our salamanders, as you see here. And if you'll entertain me for just a minute, I'm going to go down into the Greek roots and the etymology of that word amphibian. It comes from two Greek words, amphi, meaning both, and bios, meaning lives. And while we're probably most familiar with amphibians, and particularly salamanders, in their adult form, like this spotted salamander here, that's just a veritable dragon, an apex predator of the leaf litter, the terror of worms and slugs and insects on the forest floor. They spend part of their lives, the larval part of their lives, and when they're breeding, in these pools, these puddles in the forest. And then they also have adapted to be the apex predator, but for an entirely different food chain. And to a larval salamander swimming around in the forest, in a pool in the forest, this is what they're eating. They're surrounded by scuds and amphipods and all sorts of aquatic larvae of flying insects. So this is a really amazing adaptation where they have figured out how to be basically the big fish in a little pond in two very different habitats at two different parts in their life. But because they need an aquatic phase and a terrestrial phase, their habitat requirements need a lot of connectivity, and it can be a kind of delicate system because of that. So tonight, we're going to talk about three different phases of the ecology of these amphibians. First, where they live for most of their lives, and then this particular portion of the spring in which they're migrating to the final aspect of their lives that we're looking at today, when they're breeding in these vernal pools, these puddles, these wetlands in the spring. To start though, let's think about where almost all of our amphibians are right now. There was, like I mentioned earlier, there was a little bit of migration at warmer places in Vermont last Saturday in particular. But with the colder temperatures, we're back to this figure pretty much, where there's some snow above ground, and then below the leaf litter in the ground, you start to come across our frogs. And our frogs flood their bodies, instead of burrowing down below the frost line, they flood their bodies with glycerols and glucose, natural antifreezes, to protect their cells, and then they just actually freeze solid in froggy ice cubes. And they'll stay there frozen solid all winter long until the snow melts, or most of the snow melts even. There have been reports of wood frogs and spring peepers in particular jumping over snowbanks to reach breeding locations. But they'll stay there frozen until spring, whereas our salamanders in the bottom left here have an entirely different approach, where they tunnel underground, either following gaps along tree roots or taking advantage of rodent burrows to go way below the frost line. And if you've ever tried to put in a frost-free line for plumbing for your house or for a hydrant for your garden, you'll know that that's 3+ feet below ground in a lot of areas. So they're deep, deep underground. And we'll return to this figure later on and what these two different adaptations mean for their migration behavior. But that's where our amphibians are right now. We have many species of amphibians in Vermont, but we're going to focus on three characters today to just give us a broad sense of what the breadth of amphibians you might come across out there. The first is perhaps my favorite, the spotted salamander. They are about the size of a Snickers bar, but a king-size Snicker bar. Not something that you throw out at a parade, but something that if it ended up in your Halloween basket, you would be absolutely floored and return to that house year after year, decade after decade. They're truly large, charismatic, and extremely cute amphibians. They have these beautiful black-gray bodies with striking yellow spots, which actually really reminds us of roads, actually, as we have made them sort of the mascot of our amphibian road crossing program. And while they're common in the state, they're the rank S5, which is common. It doesn't get more common than S5. They're very, very rarely seen because they're an ambystoma, one of the mole salamanders. And this entire genus spends almost the entirety of its adult life below ground. They're either underneath the leaf litter or truly below ground in rodent burrows. So it's really just this, while they might be in each of our backyards, it's really just this special time in spring when they're migrating at night when we might come across them. And while they're underground and in the leaf litter, they're eating crickets, worms, spiders, beetles, all sorts of different things, really anything that they can fit in their quite impressively large mouth. Our next character tonight is the wood frog, which is also, in my opinion, tremendously cute. These are about the size of a Reese's peanut butter cup. The larger ones are the size of a large Reese's peanut butter cup. The smaller ones actually are about the size of like the really little ones that you might find in a candy dish or thrown out at a parade. And they're this brown beige color with this really distinct, what's called a dorsolateral ridge that runs from the base of their legs, their rear legs, up to the corner of their eye. And they also have this bandit or raccoon mask across their face. These wood frogs, like their name implies, live in the woods, in the forests, and they're also a common animal in Vermont. And these are ones that you might actually see somewhat regularly. They're less nocturnal than the ambystoma, the mole salamanders, like our spotted salamanders. And while they can really blend into the forest floor, they hop around. So your eye can be drawn to the motion as you walk around in the woods at night. But they're also migrating this time of year as well. Our third character tonight is the four-toed salamander. This is a really special salamander of ours. It's actually not, we don't really have records of it in the Mad River Valley, but if you are elsewhere in Vermont, particularly the Champlain Valley, this is a great one to look out for. They're about the size of a pack of Smarties, and they have this rusty back with herringbone grooves and this just brilliant white and black speckled side and belly. They live in forests, especially forested wetlands in the lower elevations of the Champlain Valley. And they're a really rare species. They're one of the species of greatest conservation needs, not only because they're already rare, but because they have such specific habitat needs in those forested wetlands. So this is something that we're really excited to see when folks report on our data surveys. And one good identifying characteristic, beside that rusty colored back and that beautiful speckled black and white belly, is you can see on this lower one, this above shot, that right where their tail meets their body, there's a little bit of a notch. And that notch is actually where they can detach their tails when they are startled. And this is a great reason to be really careful in handling a four-toed salamander, because they detach those tails as a predator avoidance strategy. They figure that if they drop their tail and their tail wiggles around, it either startles the predator and the predator backs up and they have a chance to escape, or the predator is distracted by it and the predator eats the tail and the salamander runs free and hides. And they do survive dropping their tail, but it's a big caloric cost. They have to eat a lot of small bugs to regain the calories needed to regrow a tail. And also the next time that they come across a raccoon or a bobcat or a possum, or even an owl that might have its eye out for a salamander snack, if they drop their tail because a human accidentally picked them up by the tail, then they don't have that predator avoidance strategy available to them. So now we're going to talk about where these salamanders live, starting with the spotted salamanders. These are very nocturnal creatures, and they live underground in rodent burrows and root channels. They're really widespread on the forest floor. They could be really anywhere underfoot. But if you're going to happen to find them looking under logs and rocks, would be your best bet, because they must stay moist. These salamanders breathe through their skin, and their skin, to be an effective oxygen transporting mucous membrane, has to stay moist, which is exactly why we expect to find them migrating only on rainy nights. And while that black and white, or those black and yellow spots, make them seem really obvious and stand in great contrast to this gravel road, in their natural habitat on a really varied forest floor with leaves and flowers, it actually really breaks up their outline, and they can be cryptic or camouflaged on the forest floor. Next, we have the wood frog, which is also mostly nocturnal, but because they don't go underground, they're much more commonly seen during the day by us diurnal creatures. And they're widespread, found out throughout the leaf litter in Vermont forests. They have a little bit more tolerance towards drying out. They'll stay under the leaf litter on hot, dry days, but you will see them moving around above at other times. And yeah, like I said, they could be really cryptic. See that dorsolateral ridge that I was mentioning that goes from their eye to where their rear leg meets their body? That can really mimic the midrib of a fallen leaf, and their coloring and how that black raccoon or bandit mask looks like a piece of shade cast by a leaf can really break up their outline. So they can be really tough to spot. I find that when I'm walking through the woods, I often find wood frogs by sound, not because they're calling, but because I walk somewhere and they stay still, they stay still, they stay still. And then as I approach really close, unbeknownst to me, they'll hop away, and I hear the sound of them land in leaves. And I'll look and I'll look and I'll look. And if I don't find them and I take another couple steps, they might jump again. And then I can see the motion and lead my eye to this charismatic little frog in our woods. Our last character, the four-toed salamander, is also nocturnal and rare outside the Champlain Valley and sometimes in the Connecticut River Valley. They love forested wetlands. And I point out that they're acid tolerant, but what I mean is they're tolerant of naturally occurring acidic soils. Soils that are acidic because of their geology or the biology of the community that has grown on them. All amphibians are extremely sensitive to pollution largely because they spend so much of their time in water and they breathe through their skin. They can take up toxins. They take up toxins very much. So they're often thought of as like an early warning signal, a figurative canary in the coal mine for pollution, be it acid rain or mercury deposition or chemical spills. Actually, there's some evidence showing that the spotting pattern on these spotted salamanders, when exposed to pollution, becomes more and more asymmetrical. And yeah, there's some horrifying photos of frogs that grow fifth or sixth or seventh legs due to exposure to pollution. But these four-toed salamanders are tremendously acid tolerant of naturally occurring acidic soils. And here we have a couple shots of forests that would support a four-toed salamander. They're wet, they tend to have pine trees, and they're very ferny. So returning to this figure, we have snow and then our frogs in one place above the frost line, and then the salamanders deep, deep, deep down below. As of Monday, well, we would expect that since the frogs are so much closer to the surface. And for those of you who might have experience with a root cellar know, the ground can be such a terrific insulator. Those above the frost line in shallower soils are much more responsive to temperature changes than those far below the soil. So when we had just that really warm weekend last weekend, some frogs started moving because it only took a day or two. It does, but there's a lot of inertia in the temperature of soil, but in those couple of days of really warm temperature, some frogs started to move. And we had reports, let's see, last I checked the data was Tuesday. We had like 9 reports. We had 9 surveys completed and submitted. And of those, 4 were entirely empty. They went out and they saw nothing. And the other 5 combined had like 9 wood frogs and 2 spring peepers. It was just a little early where these people were. But the amphibians that do start moving first are our frogs. I'm off the top of my head, I don't know why. I was talking with Ira and Corey beforehand about a pop-up event they did last year where they had just toads on toads on toads. And I know that toads are some of the last animals to reach the breeding pools in the spring. And I can't quite recall what they're doing in the winter that might predict that. It could just be the case that the adult toads like to hop around on land for a while to gather food and calories and build up the energetic supplies needed for breeding. But right now, we're almost in frog season in the Mad River Valley. And I think it'll take a little while longer, particularly it's warm spring rains that help bring warm temperature signals all the way down into those rodent burrows to get the salamanders moving. Like I was saying, melting snowpack, spring rains, increasing soil temperature, increasing air temperature, but it's all messy. We can give out predictions of when frogs and salamanders might be moving, but just like the weather person, we're mostly wrong whenever we try to guess when they're moving. We typically will say though that start thinking about it at April 1st and start thinking about it when it's dark out, when it's raining, and when it's over 40 degrees. But you could honestly put an asterisk on all of those because sometimes they just move at other times. And it can be really, really local. Like a south-facing hill might have its frogs, toads, and salamanders moving weeks and weeks before a north-facing hill. So when they're migrating, spotted salamanders are particularly well studied. And this 2009 study found that many of them might travel more than a quarter mile through dense woods, open fields, clear cuts, whatever they can to go in pretty much a straight line to reach their breeding pool. But they spend almost their entire lives. Almost every spotted salamander spends their entire life in that quarter mile from that same breeding pool in which they were born. I will say though that some salamanders, this is like on average, of say 100 salamanders surveyed, the 30% that are going the furthest are going more than a quarter mile. But that top 1%, that top 2% might go a quarter mile, go to the pool they were born in, look around, decide it's not for them, and then maybe go another quarter mile or another quarter mile or another quarter mile. Those rare salamanders that just really want to migrate and move long distances might have some behaviors you wouldn't expect. So on a night where you're going and you're seeing a lot of salamanders crossing the road this way to get to the breeding pool, if you see one going this way, let it go. The salamander knows where it's going. And this one might be one of those rare individuals that's moving from its natal pool, the pool it was born in, to a far, far flung destination. And it's bringing its genetic material into a population that doesn't breed very often with those that were born in the pool where it came from. And that can be a really, really important genetic flow that keeps our populations healthy. So when in doubt, the salamanders know more about salamander breeding than humans do and help it move in the direction it's pointing. And this migration can be really synchronous. This 2003 study found that it tracked every salamander that entered this vernal pool. They put up a fence around the pool, so all the salamanders had to go through a couple different spots. And they found that 90% of the spotted salamanders that returned to this pool did it over just 5 days. So while that warm weekend we had last week started some migration in the low elevations of the Champlain Valley and in southern Vermont, and then it stopped as it got cold. In a lot of cases, in a lot of years, like migration happens. So when we start getting those warm nights over 40 when it's raining, like it's good to set your clock by salamanders and just get out there whenever you can, because it can sort of be the case where you blink and you miss it. But that is to say, that's just spotted salamanders. You might miss spotted salamander migration, but if you go out there the next week, you can still get toads and wood frogs and peepers. So it's always great to get out there when it's warm. That is over 40 degrees, dark and raining. And here is what I say is almost ideal habitat and migration scenario for frogs and salamanders. That is having upland forested hills right next to a wetland. I say this is almost ideal because that wetland looks pretty big to me. It looks like that is large enough that it doesn't dry up at any point. So fish can live in it. And while I said that the larval salamander and the adult salamander have adapted to become figurative big fish in a little pool, that isn't the case if the pool is big enough to have fish in it, because a larval salamander is smaller than the mouth of many fish, and fish will famously eat just anything that fits in their mouth. So this could be, marginal habitat for a lot of our amphibians. But where there is a big pool like this, there's also probably a small pool around its edge. So these salamanders might find some microhabitat that does keep them protected from fish. The true beautiful places for salamanders to live and for most of our frogs to live are called vernal pools. There are many definitions of these, but they're small open wetlands with the really important fact that they're fishless, mostly by the fact that they dry up at some point during summer months or every couple of years. And because of that, they don't support predaceous fish. So the salamanders and the frogs can be that figurative big fish in the little pool. And this figure, excuse me, this figure comes from the Vermont Center for Eco Studies Vernal Pool Monitoring Project, Vernal Pool Atlas Project, where they have mapped every potential and confirmed and visited vernal pool in the state. These small, tiny fishless wetlands that are such important places for amphibian ecology. And if you want to get involved with that project or their vernal pool monitoring project that sees the health of these vernal pools as amphibians breed in them over years and decades, you can check them out at Vermont Center, I think vtecostudies.org. They're a great organization, and we're so happy to collaborate with them sometimes. This map actually really helped us inform our mapping of this amphibian road crossing program anywhere one of these vernal pools was next to a road. So vernal pools, these what one might call glorified puddles, or I think of as glorious puddles. Here's a time lapse of them. They're just puddles in the woods. I think we're probably, at this 1 second to the left right now. And you can start, there have definitely been reports of our frogs, wood frogs and spring peepers in particular, returning to vernal pools while there's some ice on them. For the most part, you expect things to move into the pool once all the ice has melted. And then this is a depiction of it in the height of summer, that really important aspect of vernal pools where they dry out. At that point, all the salamanders and frogs have grown legs and graduated to become terrestrial predators. Yeah, so maybe folks, oh, thanks, Corey, for putting the vernal pool project in the chat. Yeah, so maybe folks looking at this might think, oh, I have a vernal pool in my backyard. And that's a great place to observe amphibians. Like I was saying, this project, the Amphibian Road Crossing Project, is only looking at amphibians during migration as adults. And we can't, our project alone, or Vermont Center for Eco Studies project alone, which looks at baby salamanders and eggs, cannot completely work to conserve these species, because you have to do whole life cycle and both habitats at all phases of their life. So it's really great for us to both work on these projects and for folks to dip between both of them. So on to breeding. This spotted salamander, as they emerge, the males tend to emerge first and get to the pond or the pool where they lay spermatophores, little pedestals of mucus onto which they'll deposit a tiny packet of sperm, which you can actually see with your naked eye. And they'll all hang out there until the females come. And when the females come, the males will compete for the female's attention, swimming and doing these like aquatic salamander dances to show off how big and healthy and strong they are. So that the salamander can say, okay, yeah, that salamander. And then the male guides the female to his spermatophore, that little pedestal of mucus and sperm, and the female can crawl over it on the bottom of the pool and accept the sperm. And we actually have a video of this. It'll load. Oh gosh. Oh no. Oh darn, that's not working. Gosh, that's too bad. Maybe I'll have a chance to show you this at the end when we do questions, because this is just a fantastic video of just absolutely hundreds and hundreds of these spotted salamanders with their spermatophores. You can actually see in the still, those white spots are those spermatophores, those sperm packets on top of a mucus plug that they put on the bottom and then dance to attract females to them. But this is something that isn't covered in our amphibian road crossing program. So keep an eye on those glorious puddles in your backyard, and hopefully you'll discover some beautiful salamander breeding habitat. Next, we have the wood frog, which is one of those first frogs that call in spring. I haven't heard one yet, but I've been hearing red-winged blackbirds, and I know that in years past, it's not that much longer after the red-winged blackbirds arrive that our frogs are out and starting to call, even on icy vernal pools. And they're really explosive breeders. They'll males will hold onto the back of females with their hands in something called amplexus grip, as the female lays up to 700 eggs that either float throughout the pool or might be anchored to vegetation or on the bottom of the pool. In contrast to that, our four-toed salamander doesn't actually breed in wetlands. It breeds above or just next to these vernal pools. And while these two amphibians exhibit the basal trait of vertebrate biology, the most historic trait, which is that eggs require water around them to be viable. The four-toed salamander has adapted to remove its eggs from what can be a kind of scary environment. A lot of things in a vernal pool would love to make a snack out of a frog or a salamander egg. And the four-toed salamander, while it needs moisture to keep its eggs moist, has adapted to lay its eggs deep in moist beds of sphagnum moss. And it just lays like a few eggs, like no more than a dozen or two, I think, deep in this wet sphagnum moss. and the female will curl around them to protect them until those eggs hatch, and the larval tiny salamander crawls out with its like fish-like tail and water breathing at that point, and it falls out of the sphagnum moss that's either overhanging or right next to, adjacent to a pool, where it then spends the rest of its larval state after hatching in the pool, eating those copepods and amphipods and aquatic insect larvae. This is a great time. If anyone has some questions, you can drop them in the chat or unmute, as that has covered most of our amphibian biology for the night. After this, I'll move into, I'll move into the protocol and how we can step in to help these amphibians cross the road.
I have a quick question. I've always been curious about red-backed salamanders.
Yeah.
And I'm assuming they also lay their eggs terrestrially. Mm-hmm. Do they migrate, or do they just come up from being below the frost line?
Yeah, so red-backed salamanders don't, they lay their eggs terrestrially. They don't migrate to vernal pools. They lay their eggs in just like under logs and in leaf litter. They don't have an aquatic larval phase. When their eggs hatch, they're just like a teeny tiny terrestrial salamander, which allows them to be actually one of our most abundant vertebrates. What I've heard is that they have the largest amount of vertebrate biomass of any vertebrate, anything with a backbone in the state. So the next time you see a moose, like 1,000+ pound animal, just imagine that there is more than that amount of red-backed salamanders in that moose's home range. Did that answer your question, Corey?
Yes, and you touched on a controversial trivia question from a couple of years ago. So
oh no!
But yeah, I know they're terrestrial, so I was curious what they do. So they just wake up, come up, and do their egg where they are, kind of thing.
Yep. Yeah, I thought I had found some red-backed salamander eggs the other year, and they might have turned out to be slug eggs. I put them on a naturalist, and I was wrong about what I thought they were. I can't remember which direction it was, though. Great. Yeah, red-backed salamanders are one to know about because they're so common, but because they don't migrate to vernal pools for breeding, they're not one of the focal species for our data. But you're absolutely happy. We're absolutely happy to accept reports of them as you do this data. But now that we're talking about data, let's move on to the community science part of this. And first, the problem. I introduced this slide as perhaps ideal habitat arrangement for salamanders and frogs, but all too often with human development, we've built roads between good wooded upland habitat like this and the wetlands that these animals need to breed. And I'll just say a warning here, the next slide, if you care not to see it, will have squished salamanders. So you can look away, and there we go. This is unfortunately what some might see during these big migration nights. Traffic can be really hard on small, slow-moving amphibians like salamanders. And road crossing, these are, well, it's a couple hundred eggs sounds like a lot to us. These amphibians already lead really risky lives, and road crossing mortality as low as 10% can lead to the extirpation, the local extinction of the amphibian population. And remember, they're only living in like a 1/4 mile radius from one particular wetland in which they're breeding. So it doesn't take that much, like a couple bad nights and like some increased traffic for that population to be really imperiled at that place. Overall, they'll be fine throughout the entire state, but we hope that they can mix much better with humans. And that is where the Amphibian Road Crossing Program comes in. We have 4 goals of this program. The first is to increase public engagement in amphibian conservation. So for all of us here learning about amphibians today, 2 big thumbs up, give yourself a pat on the back. We've done it. We're engaging with amphibian conservation. The second is to directly decrease amphibian mortality at road crossings. Just getting humans out there, signaling cars, and then moving salamanders and frogs with their hands can really save some amphibian lives. And then our third goal is to really do this at the local level and have our data and engage communities inform transportation planning with robust data on movement and mortality at road crossings. It's the local and state road commissions that have the ability to put in structures like wildlife crossing structures that can really help connect upland wood habitat and lowland wetlands. And in talking with folks at like VTrans, the funds are there. It's sometimes just a case of like knowing where to put it, which can be like really prohibitively expensive studies if you're paying professional biologists to do it. They want to put these road crossing structures in. They have oftentimes like grant funding to put these in, but it takes a lot of time and resources to figure out where. So we're hoping that we can help inform those. And fourth, we want to contribute state biodiversity data to conservation research. We're working this year with folks at the Vermont Center for Eco Studies and the Vermont HERP, that's Reptile and Amphibian Atlas, to get all of the data that is collected by our volunteers into a place that's publicly available for all conservation researchers worldwide. And this, I should say that our program is actually really unique in that it's a statewide standardized approach to collecting this sort of data. Yeah, great. And this is what great successes can look like at the local level, where, where either roads are closed seasonally or simply just really big culverts are put in when it's time to replace a culvert. And these culverts can be used as a wildlife crossing. One place we've had a lot of really great successes in Moncton, where this road was, where this wildlife crossing structure was put in that funnels all the amphibians and all other sorts of wildlife along this wall so that they can then go underneath the bridge or underneath the road through this. And oh gosh, that video is not working either. This video is a little bit grainy and I can't get it to work tonight, but it just shows that during peak migration at any given time, there are just dozens of salamanders crossing through here. It's also used by bears and possums and bobcats. So this was a great success, and the state transportation agency was really excited to put it in and see it being used by all sorts of wildlife. Great. So this is where you come in and where we can talk about how y'all can get involved in collecting these data and helping amphibians cross the road. Oh gosh, that is a great example of both a great grip and the beautiful speckled belly of a four-toed salamander. See how that person is holding it so that there's no pressure put on that tail that might fall off. And this person has a great frog holding hand where you have one hand to cup the frog and then also the hand to keep it from hopping out of your other hand. So how it works. First, you can go to our website and you'll be pretty prepared by the things that I've been sharing tonight. I will certainly have forgotten to say something though. So we have it all written out on our webpage, northbranchnaturecenter.org/amphibian conservation. There's a volunteer manual with all this information and additional information on other species that you might see. You can brush up on that volunteer manual. Then you can visit our road crossing map. This is what our map looks like, and I'll flip to a different screen here soon. But you can see all these different dots where you can find a place that we have mapped out. Let me change the share. Can you see this map now? Great. Where you can scroll around and, oh, let's go to the map. There we go. All right, right in Moretown. And you can see all these different dots. The red dots are places that haven't been surveyed yet. So those are our highest priority. We want to know if there are salamanders and frogs there. Or you can go to these yellow or green dots as well. And if you, let's check this one out. As you zoom in, you can see this pink line will appear at some point. So out here, it's just dots. But as you pick one that might be close, or you might think might be a great place that you'd love to visit, you zoom in, you see this pink line. And what you'll do is understand where that transect, that path starts and ends. So this one starts right where Bathans Road meets Stevens Brook Road and continues all the way to this driveway. And what you'll want to do is park at one end of that. Say you're coming from this direction. Don't drive through the entire transect that we have identified as great amphibian road crossing territory. Rather, park on the close end and then walk all the way along it, counting the amphibians you see and helping them cross the road. Then when you get to the other end, take that data sheet that you had just filled out, file it away on the back of your clipboard, take out a new one, and then walk back to your car or bike or house, filling out a new data sheet. So each data sheet is one direction pass on these transects. And you're welcome to lap them as many times as you like. Just fill out a new data sheet for every pass. If at some point you get tired of filling out data sheets, rather than lumping all your data together as you count and count and count amphibians for multiple passes, just take a break. We're glad to take your data when you're happy to provide it. But if you want to stop filling out a data sheet for each pass, just move the amphibians. That's a great thing. But we're really hoping to have this data be comparing oranges to oranges, not apples to oranges. So we do ask that a data sheet is filled out for each pass. But you're welcome to always do a pass and not submit a data sheet for it. Just don't lump them all together. And then moving back to this. So now that you understand where the transect starts and ends, and you start going along that transect, collecting amphibians, one thing to know is that you're visiting those sites, like I said, on rainy nights, when it's raining, when it's around 40 or above, and when it's dark. Yeah, I think you can go anytime it's truly dark, but you know, amphibians do start moving a little bit more after maybe like 9 or 10. And those folks who are fully nocturnal and go out at 2 and 3 in the morning might have a little bit more luck if the rain only started at 11. But more on that later. As you're walking your transect, record data on site conditions. That's how much of a rain is it? Either 0, no rain, to, you can see on our data sheet, it goes down all the way to 4, which is an absolute downpour. And then the road conditions, whether it's wet or dry, and the temperature. Escort the amphibians off the road. Either you can herd frogs sometimes. They're mobile enough that you can just step behind them and they'll hop off for you, or carefully picking them up and moving them in the direction they are going. And then we also ask that you remove and count roadkill amphibians. That serves 2 purposes. First, knowing how many roadkill amphibians can be really important for conservation planning, whether that is to know if the local population is in peril, for things like planning where to put a road crossing structure. Also, you want to take them off the road so you're not double counting them when you come back. You only want to count the roadkill amphibian once. So if you pass it and then come back and count it again, that's not what we want. The other reason to do this is that those roadkill amphibians might be attractive to owls and possums and raccoons and all sorts of different animals that are attracted to carrion as a food source. And we don't want those scavengers to also be in danger of being hit by a car. And then, so do that, move them off the road, and then do the same for the return walk. Here we have an image of a data sheet being written on in pencil underneath water in the sink. At the Nature Center, we have available, and I can drop some of these off at the Moretown Library, Right in the Rain data sheets. They're data sheets printed on waterproof paper. And it's really fantastic for these surveys because these surveys really are best when it's raining out.
Pete, I'll just chime in. Actually, this is the 3 libraries. We actually put together kits that people can borrow. And as part of that, we also printed out waterproof data sheets.
Okay, great.
So we have those available at the library for people that are interested.
When did you print those out, perchance?
It was last year.
Okay. Great.
Has your data sheet changed?
We changed the data sheet in just the slightest amount. In that beforehand, we asked for photos of the rare ones, which we had defined as blue spotted salamander and four-toed salamander. But we've now expanded that to include the Jefferson salamander and the Jefferson blue spotted salamander hybrid. So I think you could just add an asterisk on the Jefferson blue hybrid and the Jefferson salamander, and then it'll all work the same. But I'm also happy to drop off some new data sheets for you.
Okay, we'll work it out. But
Great.
We also have reflective vests and buckets and a spatula and a flashlight.
Awesome.
Yes. And some signage. So.
Right. Yes, the spatula, which is a fantastic way to get those salamanders off, those roadkill salamanders and frogs off the road without getting them on your hand. I also really appreciate the spatula for a little more leverage to get that roadkill even further off the road to not endanger our possum and raccoon friends. Great. And then after you return to your car or return home, you can report all this data on your computer or on your phone on the data form on our website. Great. And then we'll process that and get it out to researchers. Step 5, congratulate yourself for helping amphibians at your site and across Vermont. A few notes on safety. Like Corey said, it's great to have reflective vests, flashlights and extra batteries, crossing signs. And we love the cute crossing signs that say salamander crossing, but even better is something that says like humans in the road or research in progress, because we're really trying to keep humans safe as well as salamanders and frogs safe from cars. The continued success of this program really relies on our star record of safety, because you are in the middle of the road at night, often on like out there roads, and almost exclusively while it's raining. So it's really good to be really visible and let drivers know that something's going on in the road. On that, a note on flashlight and headlamp courtesy around cars. These folks are doing a great job demonstrating good flashlight courtesy, where they have the flashlights pointing at themselves. After perhaps looking at the car and flashing it with your flashlight, then point the flashlight at yourself so that you are illuminated and the driver can see you while you're not blinding the driver as they're moving on the road. And do step entirely off the road as the car passes. This is also where we mentioned having a spatula for the dead amphibians. and also a clean bucket. This can serve a couple purposes. For one, if you'd like to spend a little bit of time with one of the salamanders or frogs you come across, it's great to put in a bucket or a Tupperware so that you're not handling it while you look at it or photograph it, as that can stress it out if you do that for longer than a couple seconds. Also, on some of these really, really fantastically busy road crossing nights, you might have dozens, or like I've seen even 100 amphibians in one transect, one pass. So it can be great to actually like have a bucket to pick the salamanders up in, and then move to the side of the road and then release them in the direction they are heading. And of course, bring your data sheet and a clipboard. You can bring the protocol, excuse me, the protocol manual with you as a refresher. And then a few notes on keeping the amphibians safe. When you're handling them, we ask that you handle them with clean, wet, and low hands. And I put an asterisk on clean because that's not clean with hand sanitizer, or even clean like you're washing them with dish soap very often. We really want to be sure that there are no chemicals or oils, anything spicy or fragrant on your hands. So when you do wash them with soap and water at home, perhaps, but then rinse off so much. These amphibians are covered in mucous membranes, which is like similar to what's on the inside of our mouth or even our eye. So if you think of chemicals in your soap or your dinner that you wouldn't like to get in your eye, that's basically what many of these amphibians are feeling with their entire body. And then wet helps them from drying out and keeping them low to the ground in case they escape your hands, they don't have far to fall. And then we'll note that you handle them only when necessary. If it's almost all the way across the road, perhaps it's fine to just let it cross. I will say, in my view, if you've never seen that amphibian before, it's like probably necessary in my mind to spend a little bit of time with it. Or if you have a kid with you, like definitely encourage them to get their hands on amphibians, because this is a fantastic way to connect with these non-human neighbors and create a new generation of advocates for them. Because in the end, it really is conservationists and habitat that leads to the success of these local populations. Great. And then a brief update on what our data looked like last year. We had 220 surveys, 539 volunteer efforts for a combined total of 331 hours, counting 5,382 amphibians across the state. That's fantastic. And this isn't even one of our best years. Last year, we had this unfortunate tendency for those rainy nights for the rain to start at about 3 or 4 in the morning. And for most of the reasonable volunteers we work with, that's far too late for them to then be getting out. So there weren't less amphibians last year overall, but they were much less readily counted. Like I said here, 26% more rainy than a sprinkle. If we go back to this data sheet, you'll see the rain check one. It goes 0 to 4. The average for last year was a 1.26. I'm hoping for this year it'll be much rainier, averaging somewhere around like 2, just rain, or a 3, heavy rain, and have those rainy evenings start a little bit earlier so more reasonable people could get out and experiencing these big amphibian nights. Great. Now that you have all that, get signed up on our website. northbranchnaturecenter.org/amphibian conservation. There's an amphibian road crossing guard email list. You can sign up for that, and do check the box that you're part of the MRV, the Mad River Valley team, so that we can keep you on this local mailing list and connect you with all the library's resources. And then get out on any rainy night where it's at or around 40 degrees. Great. And at this point, I am happy to take any questions that folks have. Yeah, I see Joan raising your hand, but you're muted right now.
Unmute.
Hi, Joan.
Hi. So the list of all the different, I now know 3 or 4 different kinds of salamanders and frogs, but you had on there a dozen or 10 or 12. I don't have no idea what those look like. So how would I mean, I can help them cross the road. I could watch, I can count, but no way I could tell one from the other, except the ones we just went over tonight.
Yeah. So a couple resources for that. One is that our manual goes through identification of all sorts of different salamanders and frogs, and has great photos on them. That manual is a really rich resource. These are excerpts from them with good photographs. It also has things like, we have a professional photographer on staff at North Branch by chance, and he talks about what tips he has for photographing these, because they can be really tricky because they're mucousy, they're wet, and there's a lot of glare, and it's probably raining when you're doing it. So things like flash photography can be really tough. So that volunteer manual is really helpful for that instance. Also, just feel free to just say, I don't know, on the data sheet. Or like put in the comments, like, I think these were spring peepers. Take a photo and then submit that photo through the photo submission portal. And Sean or I can take a look at it and be like, oh yeah, those 96 frogs that match this photo were definitely spring peepers. And the ability of us to like look at photos and like say like, oh yeah, and like confirm that on the data makes it really valuable for research and for like the permanent record of biodiversity in the state.
Pete, do you find iNaturalist to be a good resource for amphibians or not?
I love
iNaturalist. Use it very much. What? I
love iNaturalist. It's great. And it's really good for amphibians. Different taxa, like iNaturalist is a little less responsive to. Amphibians are something that there are a lot of fans of out there. And it's like that. Within a couple of days, someone will look at your photo and give you an identification for it. Where like I have some goldenrods on iNaturalist that I submitted 6 years ago and no one has identified yet.
So it's an app, correct? It's a way that you can share photos and sort of crowdsource knowledge about what it is you have in front of you. Just in terms of if you want to learn more, it can be a fun tool. Yeah,
iNaturalist is fantastic.
Okay.
And then I would just add that, you know, the Friends of the Mad River and the libraries will do a pop-up event at some point. And if you can join us for that, there's nothing like the hands-on experience to get more familiar, both with the amphibians and also the process of recording data and getting it into the app. And so, you know, Corey or myself or whoever else would be on hand to help facilitate that.
So is there any way other than, I saw this on Front Porch Forum, is there any other way to keep track of what's going on when?
So if you sign up to be a volunteer and you indicate you're part of the Mad River Valley team, then we will have your contact information.
Okay.
So that's probably primarily how we'll communicate about pop-up monitoring events. I wish we could say like on April 11th at 7 p.m. But you know, it has to be those kind of 3 factors for it to be worth it, really.
Okay.
Yeah, it's actually that that unpredictability of when amphibian migration is that makes this community science project really like so unique and valuable. There are academics and conservation organizations out there that are interested in knowing how many salamanders there are out there and frogs and where they're living, but no academic institution can pay enough technicians
to go out there and
to count them all across the state like that, being like, oh, it's going to be a good night, like let me get 1,000 technicians to monitor all these sites. So like this is the way to get state biodiversity data on
so
this,
I knew that you can't tell me 2 weeks it's going to be 40 degrees, go out, this place is going to be great, they're going to be crossing by the thousands, but I want to know what the other pop-up not meetings, Zoom, get whatever, so I can get more information before I do that.
Yeah.
That's what I meant. But if I sign up as a volunteer, then I'll be on the list to know the library's doing this day, or, right?
Yep.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, that'd be a great place to start. So you can
Okay.
get to that through North Branch naturecenter.org/
Right.
amphibian-conservation. And I
Yep.
can get that information to Corey and the other Powder River Valley
Okay.
libraries.
Yep.
If you see on my screen, here's a little bit more information. If you zoom in and click on these dots, it will tell you how many surveys have been done there,
Yep.
how many minutes, and then how many amphibians have been spotted. So this one, Tim went out twice and never saw an amphibian. Maybe he wasn't going out in good weather, but
Pete,
you can kind of
Pete,
scroll around on here.
Pete, will you scroll down to Warren, because that's where we did our pop-up event last year. It was on Dump Road. I don't know if you know
this. Yeah, here we go.
I'm just curious how many, if we did submit.
Yeah, great. Volunteers with most survey, Ira.
That's
103 surveys we have from there with 16.4 amphibians per hour. You got wood frog, spring peeper, American toad, and a spotted salamander one time, and another species as well.
Then that might be, I know some of our volunteers live right there too, so that might be some of their data. I do want to just point out, if you haven't noticed in the chat, Marie from Warren did put the direct link for the volunteer sign up for people.
Great.
I did see that. Yep.
The Vermont VT Herp Atlas, the Vermont Herpetology Atlas, they will publish their predictions for migration events in the Champlain Valley, which can sometimes give us a bit of an idea of when they might be. I think we didn't, any of the migration they saw last weekend, we didn't see at all, but that's a good resource. Or the Harris Center in New Hampshire could be a good resource. But both of those have like a tighter geographic range. The VT Herp Atlas is Jim Andrews and like focuses a lot down by Salisbury. But yeah, we haven't strayed to be giving like large scale predictions for when salamanders and frogs are moving, just because we're trying to cover the whole state, and what's happening in the Northeast Kingdom isn't what's happening in Brattleboro. But yeah, this is we have it set up that like any person can like go to one of these trainings or watch it on our website, read the manual, and just like go out there. You could after dinner be like, oh, we should brush up on salamander crossing, and like get out there and do it yourself. You don't have to sign up for a site and agree to visit it 6 times throughout the spring. It's just we hope that it's a really low barrier for entry, and it can bring this to a lot of people with a lot of different skills and schedules and availability.
Great, thank you so much, Pete. Does anybody have any other questions? Well, I know now I'm extra excited, especially since you included the cuteness factor on those amphibians about. And yes, so definitely sign up to be a volunteer. We'll have your contact information, and we'll just keep you posted when we're heading out. And of course, whenever you want to head out, that's part of it too. So feel free to come to the library, get a kit and head out, or assemble your own kit. It's all very much what works for you.
Okay, thank you very much.
Yes, have a wonderful night, and thanks again, Pete.
Yeah, great. Thanks all.
Oh, have a good night.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Think
Bye-bye.
warm weather and rain.
No 14 degrees, please.
We have a